Welcome back to the barn. Outside, everything has already gone still, and the only sound left is a horse breathing slowly in the dark. Tonight's story is a simple one: horses sleep standing up. Not once in a while, most nights, for most of their lives, they lock their legs, let their heads drop a little, and doze right where they're standing. Over the next few parts we'll get into why that happens, what's actually going on in a horse's body to make it possible, what happens on the rare nights a horse does lie down, and a few odd little herd habits most people never think about. Picture a paddock at midnight. A breeze moving through dry grass. A fence catching the last bit of moonlight. Near the far corner, a horse stands with its eyes half closed and one back leg resting off the ground, barely moving. It looks like a statue. It's asleep. There's no tension in it, nothing braced or on edge. This is just how the animal rests, the same way it has for thousands of years, long before barns or fences or anyone standing around wondering why. We'll start with the legs, since that's really where the whole thing begins. Here's the part people always wonder about: how does a horse stay upright while it's dozing off? The answer is in the legs, in something horse owners sometimes call a stay apparatus, though we don't need the technical name tonight. Think of it as a built-in lock. When a horse settles into a light doze, its legs shift into a position that holds the joints in place without the muscles doing much work at all. The weight of the body settles down through bone, the way a folding chair clicks into its open position. Once it's locked, it stays locked, no balancing required. That's the whole trick behind the statue pose. The horse isn't straining to stay up or concentrating on holding still. The legs are just doing what they were built to do. A field slowly getting darker. Crickets starting up in the grass. And in the middle of it, an animal so at ease in its own body that sleep barely interrupts anything. Next, where this ability actually came from. Long before horses were ridden, before saddles or stables existed at all, their wild ancestors lived on open grassland with almost nowhere to hide. That fact alone shaped how a horse rests even today. On open ground, lying down is a gamble. Getting back up takes time, and time is the one thing you don't have if a predator gets close. So somewhere back in their evolutionary history, horses developed a way to rest deeply enough to recover while staying ready to bolt within seconds. Standing sleep won out, and over generations the body adapted to make it comfortable instead of tiring. It's a small example of how animal habits are often just old survival lessons that stuck around after the danger that created them faded. A horse dozing in a fenced, perfectly safe paddock tonight is sleeping the same way its ancestors did on the open plain. The wind drops for a moment. The grass stops moving. Next, the kind of sleep a horse can only get lying down. Standing sleep only gets a horse partway there. There's a deeper stage of sleep, the kind where the body goes fully limp, and a horse can't reach it while it's upright. For that it has to lie down. That deeper sleep doesn't last long, somewhere around 30 minutes to an hour a day, usually broken into short stretches rather than one long session. That's genuinely enough. It's a brief, almost private part of a horse's day, and most owners never happen to catch it. Here's the thing worth holding on to: a horse won't enter that fully relaxed sleep unless it feels completely safe. Not fairly safe, completely. So a horse stretched out flat in a field, breathing slow, is telling you something about how secure that field feels to it right now. Somewhere a hoof shifts in the straw, once, then nothing. Next, what that lying down sleep actually looks like, and how a herd manages to protect each other through it. When a horse finally lies down for that deeper rest, it tends to pick its spot carefully, dry ground, some open space, somewhere it can still see around itself. Nothing dramatic. Just instinct doing its quiet math. The lying down itself isn't graceful. The front end lowers first, the weight shifts, the back half follows, and the horse ends up on its side or curled onto its chest with its legs tucked. Next to the elegant standing pose, it looks almost clumsy, though nothing is wrong. It's just a body letting go all the way. Once down, the breathing slows further and the eyes may close completely. Every so often there's a small twitch, the same kind of flicker you'd notice in a sleeping dog. Some researchers think this points to a light form of dreaming, though what a horse actually experiences during it is still genuinely unclear. By first light there's dew on the flattened grass where a horse spent part of the night, the shape already fading as the sun climbs. Next, what makes that lying down rest possible in the first place, which turns out to involve more than one horse. A horse lying flat on the ground, fully relaxed, is in a vulnerable spot. Getting back up takes a few seconds, and those seconds matter. Herds handle this the way herds usually handle problems, together. In most groups, at least one horse tends to stay standing while the others lie down. It isn't an assigned shift. It's a loose pattern that shifts naturally depending on who's most alert at the moment. As one horse lies down, another that had been resting often gets up and takes over watch. The group rotates through the night without anyone deciding it should. This is a big part of why horses generally want company. A horse without a herd around it tends to get noticeably more anxious about lying down fully, and sometimes skips that deep rest for longer than is good for it. Safety in numbers isn't just a phrase here, it's closer to a requirement. Several horses scattered across a paddock, most lying still, one standing near the fence with its ears turning toward some distant sound. Next, how a horse's ears and eyes stay on duty even during lighter sleep. Even during ordinary standing sleep, a horse isn't as checked out as it looks. Its ears keep rotating while the eyes stay half shut, and each ear can move independently, almost like two small radar dishes working on their own. That means a dozing horse can still catch a distant sound, a branch shifting, another animal moving nearby, without ever fully waking up. The information gets processed just enough to be useful without pulling the horse out of its rest. It's an efficient kind of half-awareness, and a lot of animals that live in open, exposed places develop some version of it. Eyesight helps too. A horse's eyes sit on the sides of its head, giving it an almost complete view around its body, with only a small blind spot directly in front and behind. Even with the eyes half closed, very little of the surroundings goes unwatched. One horse's ears turning slowly toward a sound far off in the dark. The rest of it never moves. Next, how much sleep a horse actually needs across a full day, since the number tends to surprise people. If you had to guess how long a horse sleeps each day, you'd probably guess somewhere near what a dog or cat needs. That's nowhere close. A horse usually gets somewhere between 2.5 and 5 hours total across a full day, and most of that is light dozing while standing. Only a small slice of it is the deeper, lying down sleep we've been talking about. It's a small amount, considering how much energy a horse spends grazing and moving through the day. But their bodies seem built for rest in short, frequent bursts instead of one long stretch, which is how most humans prefer to sleep. That fits with their history as grazers. A mouthful of grass doesn't give you much energy, so a horse has to spend long hours chewing, day and night. There's not a lot of spare time left for extended sleep, and evolution seems to have favored a body that could get by on very little. A horse lifts its head, chews for a while, drifts back toward dozing, and repeats the cycle a little later. Next, a few smaller, stranger details about horse sleep. Foals sleep differently from adult horses. Young foals spend a lot more time lying down fully, sometimes stretched flat on their sides in a way that can genuinely alarm someone seeing it for the first time. From a distance it can look lifeless. It's completely normal. As foals grow, this shifts gradually toward the standing dominant sleep of adult horses, usually settling in within the first year. It's the kind of change that happens slowly enough that most people never notice it happening at all. Weather changes things too. On hot days, horses often push more of their resting toward the cooler overnight hours. Biting flies in warmer months can noticeably cut into how much deep, lying down rest a horse gets. A bad bug night can leave a horse relying almost entirely on lighter standing dozes instead. Stalls and open pasture matter as well. Some horses feel just as secure in a familiar stall as they do out in an open field. Others, usually the more anxious ones, seem to need that wider visibility before they'll fully commit to lying down. A barn at night, one stall door slightly open, straw pressed into a rough circle where a horse recently lay and has since gotten up. So here we are, back where we started, a quiet paddock, a horse standing still under a darkening sky. What looked at first like a strange or even funny habit turns out to be older and more sensible than it seems. A body shaped by open grassland and long stretches of exposure, still carrying that same design into every modern field and stable, generation after generation. Standing sleep isn't a shortcut or a quirk. It's a balance between rest and readiness, worked out over an enormous stretch of time. And tucked in beside it, that occasional deep, lying down sleep is a reminder that even an animal built for constant alertness still needs a few fully relaxed minutes to actually recover. Past the fence line, the wind finally settles. The grass stops moving. One horse stands in the moonlight, a back leg resting, ears turning now and then toward the dark. There's more to this story yet, a few corners of the habit we haven't gotten to. For now, the paddock just sits there, undisturbed, the night taking its own pause before we pick it back up. Back to our paddock, still settled somewhere between darkness and moonlight. Before we go further, a quick reminder of where we left off. We just watched a horse resting under the stars, its body running on habits built long ago on open grassland. Tonight we go a little further, into some smaller, stranger corners of horse sleep that don't get talked about much. One thing worth mentioning early, horses sleep differently depending on age, not just as foals but well into their older years too. Senior horses, like older humans, tend to shift their sleep patterns again. Some develop mild stiffness that makes lying down and getting back up harder, so they lean more on standing rest as they age, sometimes cutting into their deep sleep even further than is ideal. Attentive owners keep an eye on this. A noticeable drop in lying down rest over time can be an early sign of joint discomfort or another health issue building underneath. A stable at very late hours. One older horse stands near the back wall, weight shifted slightly onto 3 legs, breathing slow and even. Next, how domestication reshaped some of these ancient sleeping habits. Domestication changed a lot about how horses live, but their sleeping habits stayed remarkably close to what their wild ancestors practiced centuries ago. Even in a secure barn with walls and locked gates, most horses still default to standing rest for most of their sleep, as if the body never fully believed the danger was gone. That holdover says something about how deep instinct runs. A horse can be born in a stable, never once encounter a predator in its life, and still carry forward a sleeping posture designed generations ago for constant vigilance. Instinct tends to outlive the circumstances that created it. That said, domestication did loosen things a bit. Horses in secure, familiar environments generally feel safe enough to lie down for deeper rest more consistently than a wild horse on constantly uncertain terrain. Trust, once established with an environment or a herd, does translate into more relaxed sleeping behavior over time. A stable block at night, stall doors lined up in a row. Most horses stand. 1 or 2 lie fully down, unbothered by the others shifting nearby. Next, the particular sound of a sleeping barn at night. A barn is never completely silent once every horse has drifted off. There's a slow shifting of weight from one leg to another. The occasional soft huff of breath. Somewhere down the row, straw rustles as one horse adjusts without fully waking. These small sounds aren't restlessness so much as a body still lightly monitoring its surroundings, even in sleep. A fully alert horse and a fully sleeping horse rarely look as different as people expect, and that overlap is exactly what standing sleep was built for. Long-time owners often say they can tell a calm barn from a tense one just by these small nighttime sounds. A tense barn carries more frequent shifting, more restless hoof movement, less of that steady, settled quiet. It's a skill built from enough nights of just listening. Moonlight in narrow strips across a wooden floor, dust drifting through the beam, undisturbed except for the occasional slow exhale from somewhere out of sight. Next, how weather shifts an entire herd's resting patterns overnight. Weather plays a bigger role in horse sleep than most people think. On a cold winter night, horses often huddle closer together, partly for warmth, but also because a tighter group needs fewer individuals on watch at any given moment. Rain changes things too. Many horses seem less inclined to lie down fully during heavy rain, probably because wet ground is uncomfortable and getting up quickly is harder on slick, uneven footing. On these nights, herds tend to lean almost entirely on standing rest until things dry out. Wind, oddly, unsettles horses more than steady rain does. A gusting, unpredictable wind carries sound and motion from every direction at once, which makes it harder for that light alert system to settle. On windy nights, herds tend to stay more clustered and more standing focused than usual. A paddock under a light winter drizzle, several horses gathered near a run-in shed, tails turned to the wind, waiting for the weather to pass. Next, how sleep connects to a horse's mood and behavior during the day. A horse that consistently misses out on deep, lying down sleep doesn't just look tired the next day the way a person might. The effects show up more subtly: shorter patience, a bit more irritability during handling, or occasional stumbling caused by a sudden urge to enter deep sleep while still standing. That last one, sometimes seen in horses under real sleep deprivation, involves the legs briefly buckling as the body tries to force its way into deep sleep despite being upright, since deep sleep genuinely can't happen standing. It looks alarming to witness. It usually resolves once the horse gets enough safe, comfortable opportunity to lie down properly again. This is part of why experienced caretakers pay close attention to a horse's environment, making sure stalls and paddocks feel secure and comfortable enough that a horse actually chooses to lie down regularly. An anxious environment can chip away at sleep quality without ever looking dramatic on the surface. A paddock corner where dry leaves have gathered, moonlight catching the edges, everything still except a slow, steady breath nearby. Next, how mares and foals share sleep differently from the rest of a herd. A mare with a young foal sleeps quite differently from the rest of the herd. In the earliest weeks she stays closer to standing rest herself, more alert than usual, while her foal spends much more time lying fully down nearby, sometimes stretched out so completely it looks concerning to anyone unfamiliar with normal foal behavior. The arrangement makes sense. A newborn foal, still building strength and coordination, benefits enormously from deep, fully relaxed sleep, while the mare takes on watch duty during those vulnerable early weeks, gradually easing back into more balanced rest as the foal grows steadier on its legs. Over time this shifts gradually, the foal adopting more standing dominant sleep as it matures, until its pattern closely mirrors any other adult horse in the herd. A slow transition, rarely dramatic, built from weeks of small adjustments. A corner of pasture at dawn, a foal lying flat, legs loosely folded, breathing slow and even, while its mother stands watch nearby, ears turning toward the wider field now and then. Next, how wild horses today, in various parts of the world, keep these same habits largely unchanged. Even now, wild and semi-wild horse populations scattered across the world, protected ranges in North America, remote populations in parts of Europe and Asia, sleep in almost exactly the pattern their ancestors relied on. Standing rest dominates. Deep, lying down sleep happens briefly, carefully, usually with at least one herd member staying alert nearby. Researchers studying these populations have found remarkably consistent behavior across very different environments and climates, which suggests this pattern isn't shaped by any one landscape but is built into the species as a whole. Across mountains, plains, forests, and coastlines, in climates from bitter cold to dry heat, horses everywhere are doing the same thing tonight that we've been describing all along. Under a completely different sky than the one above our paddock, another herd stands equally still, equally at ease, following the same rhythm passed down through generations. Next, a shorter, calmer passage before we continue. A pause here. No new information, just a scene to settle into. A wide, dark field stretching toward a distant tree line. Horses scattered loosely across the grass, some standing, one or two lying fully down, moving at the pace of a night with nowhere to be. Clouds drift slowly across a half-visible moon, shifting the light over the field. A light breeze moves through, barely enough to stir the grass, then fades again. Nothing here is waiting for anything. The scene just exists, the way it has for countless nights before this one. This kind of stillness isn't something horses fall into by accident. It's something they work toward, feeling safe with their surroundings, comfortable with the herd, secure enough in the space to finally let the body soften into rest. Next, a closer look at how horses use body language even while resting. Even while resting, horses keep communicating with each other in small ways, mostly through posture rather than sound. The direction a horse stands, how close it positions itself to certain herd members, even the angle of its head, all carry small pieces of information within the group. A horse that rests beside the same particular individual night after night is often signaling a close, trusted bond. These resting partnerships tend to stay fairly stable over time, with certain horses consistently choosing the same companions rather than shifting around randomly. Ears play their part here too. Relaxed, drooping ears across most of the group tend to signal a settled, secure atmosphere, while more upright, actively rotating ears scattered through the group suggest a more alert or uncertain night. Experienced observers can often gauge a herd's comfort just by scanning ear posture across the group. A herd gathered near a fence line, most heads lowered, ears soft, two horses standing close together near the center, shoulders barely touching. We'll close out this section shortly. We've covered a fair bit of ground in this section, older horses adjusting their sleep with age, whether shifting a herd's resting choices, the small body language horses use even while asleep. Nothing rushed, just a slow gathering of small details about a habit most people never think twice about. The paddock has settled further into stillness. Most of the herd rests, weight balanced evenly, breathing slow. Near the fence line, one horse remains standing watch, patient under a sky that hasn't shifted much since we started. There's more of this to explore, a few threads we haven't touched yet. For now, the herd rests, and the story pauses here before picking back up. Back to our paddock, resting exactly where we left it. A quick reminder of the ground already covered, the locked legs, the ancient grassland instincts, mares and foals, shifting weather, the body language shared across a resting herd. Tonight we go a little further, into a few details that rarely come up in ordinary conversation about horses. One piece we haven't touched yet is grooming, and how it connects to rest. Horses that groom each other regularly during the day, nibbling gently along the neck and shoulders of a trusted companion, tend to also rest closer together at night. This mutual grooming, sometimes called allogrooming by researchers, seems to strengthen the same bonds that later decide who lies down near whom once it gets dark. Trust built in daylight carries forward into darkness. A pair of horses near a fence post in the fading evening light, heads crossed gently over each other's shoulders, neither one in a hurry to move. Next, how horses handle sleep during travel, which is harder on them than most people realize. Travel is a genuine challenge for horses when it comes to rest. Trailers and transport vehicles, however well designed, rarely offer the open, monitorable space a horse's instincts are looking for. The swaying, unfamiliar sounds, and confined quarters push horses almost entirely toward light standing rest, and proper lying down sleep becomes rare or absent on longer trips. That's part of why experienced handlers plan rest stops carefully on long transport, giving horses a chance to stand somewhere stationary and familiar feeling, even if true deep sleep still has to wait until the trip ends. A horse arriving after a long haul is often carrying more sleep debt than it looks. Horses seem to bounce back fairly fast once they're back in a secure, familiar place, often catching up on missed deep sleep within the first night or two home. The body seems decent at balancing the books once it gets the chance. A stable yard just after a long trip, one horse finally lying fully down in a fresh, familiar stall, legs loosely folded, clearly given over to rest after a long day. Next, how researchers actually study something as hard to observe as sleep in a horse. Studying sleep in an animal that mostly does it standing still, in the dark, has its own set of challenges. Researchers have used overnight video monitoring, movement sensors on a horse's legs, and, in more detailed studies, small portable devices that track brain activity, similar in principle to equipment used in human sleep studies, just scaled up for a much bigger patient. These studies have confirmed a lot of what we've already covered tonight: the brief nature of deep sleep, the reliance on herd company, the influence of a secure environment. They've also turned up some real variation between individual horses, with some needing more lying down rest than others, tied as much to temperament as anything else. Some researchers think this variation might eventually help flag horses at higher risk of sleep-related issues before more obvious symptoms show up, though this area of study is still fairly young compared to human sleep research. A research barn very late at night, a small blinking light on a monitoring device near a horse's shoulder, the horse itself standing calmly, already deep into its usual rest. Next, old myths people have carried about horse sleep for generations. Before modern research cleared up much of what we've talked about tonight, plenty of myths circulated about horse sleep. One persistent idea held that horses never lie down at all, under any circumstances, which we now know is untrue, given everything already covered about their need for occasional deeper rest. Another old belief held that a horse lying down always meant illness or trouble. That one probably grew out of real cases where sick horses did spend unusual amounts of time lying flat, mixed with a general lack of understanding about normal resting behavior. It still lingers in some corners today, occasionally worrying newer owners who walk past a perfectly healthy horse taking a normal nap. Slowly, through patient observation and accumulated research, these older ideas have mostly given way to the clearer picture we've been building tonight. A field at dusk, a young horse lying comfortably in the grass, an old wooden sign creaking nearby in the breeze, worn from years of weather no one bothered replacing. Next, a shorter pause before we continue. A pause again. No new detail this time, just a scene to settle into. A wide field under a sky slowly working through its darkest hours, horses scattered loosely across the grass, some standing, one or two resting fully on their sides, everything at the same unhurried pace this story has kept from the start. A distant sound drifts in, maybe an owl somewhere in the tree line, then fades, absorbed into the wider stillness. Nothing here reacts with alarm. The herd barely shifts, ears turning slightly before settling back. This kind of calm doesn't happen by accident. It's earned, built from familiarity with their surroundings, trust in their companions, and a long history written into their instincts. Next, how something as simple as fence design and paddock layout affects how well a herd rests. It sounds like a small detail, but the physical layout of a paddock genuinely affects how comfortably a herd settles into rest. Wide, open areas with clear sight lines in multiple directions tend to encourage more lying down sleep, since horses can more easily tell that nothing unexpected is approaching. Cramped or oddly shaped spaces, especially ones with blind corners or limited visibility, push horses toward relying more on standing rest, even when the space is technically secure. The issue usually isn't real danger, it's the horse's own instinctive trouble fully trusting a space it can't see all of. Facility designers who know this favor open sight lines and predictable layouts, understanding that a herd's sense of safety depends as much on what they can see as on what's actually happening around them. A long, open pasture toward a distant fence line, several horses gathered near the middle, clear of any corners, resting easily under the open sky. Next, how horses shift their resting spots across the seasons. Across the changing seasons, horses shift where and how they rest. In warmer months, shaded spots under trees become popular during the hottest part of the day, with grazing and standing rest pushed toward the cooler evening and early morning hours instead. As autumn sets in and temperatures drop, herds start clustering more closely during rest, a shift that continues into winter, when close grouping is almost constant overnight. Come spring, as temperatures rise and daylight stretches, resting patterns loosen back toward the spread-out arrangement seen in summer. This seasonal rhythm repeats year after year, another layer of the herd adjusting itself to whatever the year brings, without any real effort involved. A pasture in early autumn, leaves just starting to turn at the edges, horses standing slightly closer together than they might in midsummer, a faint chill in the evening air. Next, how horses and humans have shared moments of rest throughout history. Throughout history, moments of shared rest between horses and humans occasionally made it into the record. Old accounts from herders, cavalry units, and early settlers sometimes mention horses resting calmly nearby while people slept in the same general area, especially where trust between horse and handler had built up over time. Some historical writings describe soldiers relying on a nearby resting horse almost as an early warning system, trusting that a sudden shift in posture or a raised head meant something worth paying attention to. How much of that was practical instinct and how much was folklore probably varies from account to account. Either way, it points to a long thread running through human and horse history, built gradually through shared time, shared space, and eventually shared rest. An old stable scene, dim lantern light barely reaching the corners, a horse standing nearby while, somewhere just out of sight, someone long ago settled down to sleep close by, trusting the stillness of the animal beside them. Next, another short pause before we continue. Settling into stillness again for a moment. A paddock resting somewhere between deep night and the first hints of morning, still hours off. The herd stays loosely scattered, most standing in that familiar locked, relaxed posture, a couple lying fully down nearby. A faint mist gathers low across the grass, drifting without direction. Somewhere off, a fence post creaks under a light gust, then goes quiet again. Nothing here rushes. The scene keeps its own pace, same as it has the whole way through. There's still a bit more ground to cover before we bring the full picture into focus. For now, the paddock rests, and the story pauses again before carrying on. We've covered a lot of ground in this section: mutual grooming and its influence on nighttime closeness, the challenges of resting during travel, the old myths about horses never lying down, the slow seasonal shifts a herd moves through across a year. Bit by bit, the picture has gotten fuller with each part. The paddock stays just as calm as it's been throughout, the herd settled across the grass, weight balanced evenly among those still standing, breathing slow among those lying down. Near the fence line, that familiar watchfulness continues, same as always. There's still more of this story ahead, a few threads not yet gathered. For now, the night keeps its own pace, the paddock resting under a sky that's barely shifted since we began. Back to our paddock, resting right where we left it. So far tonight we've covered grooming habits, travel challenges, old myths, seasonal shifts, and a few glimpses into history. A bit more ground to cover, so let's keep going. One thing worth exploring is how a horse's excellent night vision supports all this resting behavior. Horses have a structure at the back of the eye that reflects available light back through the retina a second time, giving them a real boost in low-light vision compared to many other animals, humans included. It's the same structure behind that faint glow sometimes seen in a horse's eyes under torchlight or headlights. That night vision means a resting horse, even lightly dozing, keeps a reasonably useful picture of its surroundings in near total darkness, one more layer of security built into the whole standing sleep arrangement. A dark paddock lit only by a sliver of moonlight, a horse's eyes catching a faint silvery glow as it turns its head towards some distant, unremarkable sound. Next, a quick comparison to a few other large grazing animals with a similar lifestyle. Horses aren't the only large grazing animals that lean on standing rest. Giraffes sleep even less, often getting by on startlingly small amounts of actual deep sleep, sometimes just a few minutes at a time, given how much their long legs complicate lying down and getting back up. Zebras, close relatives of horses, follow a pattern remarkably similar to domestic horses, heavy reliance on standing rest with brief stretches of deeper, lying down sleep, almost always with the protection of a herd nearby. Given how closely related they are, that makes sense. Cattle, on the other hand, lie down considerably more often than horses, spending a larger share of their resting time fully down, reflecting a different balance between vulnerability and the benefits of full rest. The comparison is a good reminder that standing sleep isn't a universal rule among grazing animals, it's one solution among several, shaped by each species' own history. An imagined plain at dusk, a small mixed group of grazing animals scattered across the grass, each following its own rhythm of rest. Next, how a horse's digestion connects to its resting patterns. A horse's digestive system plays a bigger role in this than people might expect. Horses are built to graze almost continuously, and their digestive tracts work best with a steady, near-constant intake of small amounts of forage rather than the larger, spaced-out meals other animals rely on. That constant grazing need shapes how sleep gets distributed through the day. Instead of one long rest, a horse's schedule breaks into short cycles: graze, brief standing doze, occasional deeper rest, graze again, repeating around the clock. Taking away regular access to forage, even briefly, can disrupt this rhythm and spill over into disrupted resting behavior too. That's part of why experienced caretakers pay close attention to feeding schedules. A well-managed grazing routine supports healthier, more consistent sleep across a herd. A pasture at early dawn, horses grazing slowly across the dew-covered grass, one nearby still dozing lightly on its feet, unbothered by the activity around it. Next, how training and daily workload affect how deeply a horse rests at night. Horses that work hard during the day, riding, herding tasks, general exercise, often show different resting patterns than horses living a more idle, pasture-based life. Physical exertion seems to increase the odds of deeper, lying down rest later that night, not unlike how activity affects sleep quality in humans. Mental stress from training can work the opposite way, though, especially inconsistent or overly demanding handling, leaving a horse too alert or unsettled to fully commit to deep rest even after a physically tiring day. That's part of why calm, patient, consistent handling matters beyond just daytime behavior. It carries forward into how well a horse rests once evening comes. Experienced trainers notice this directly. Horses handled with steady patience tend to settle into rest more readily than those managed inconsistently, even when the workload is similar. A stable yard just after evening feeding, one horse already lying comfortably in fresh straw, visibly tired from a full day's work, relaxed as the darkness settles in. Next, a short pause before we continue. A pause here. A paddock under a sky now deep into its darkest hours, stars scattered faintly overhead, barely visible through a thin drifting layer of cloud. The herd stays loosely gathered, most standing in that familiar relaxed posture, one or two lying fully down nearby, at the same pace this story has kept all along. A faint rustle moves through nearby grass, probably a small nocturnal creature passing through, and the herd barely reacts, ears shift slightly, then settle back into stillness. Nothing here hurries toward anything. We've covered a good deal of ground already, and there are still a few threads left to gather. For now the paddock rests, and the story pauses again before we continue. Orphaned or hand-raised foals, separated early from their mothers, often show different sleeping patterns than foals raised normally within a herd. Without a mother nearby to provide that early sense of security, some hand-raised foals initially struggle to settle into deep, lying down rest, staying more standing alert than is typical for their age. Caretakers working with orphaned foals often go to real lengths to help, sometimes introducing a calm older companion animal, occasionally even a goat or a settled older horse, to offer some of that same reassurance a mother would normally provide. Most orphaned foals do gradually settle into more typical resting patterns, though the adjustment period varies a lot from one foal to another. It's a reminder of how deeply social this whole resting arrangement is for horses, built not just around individual comfort, but around companionship and trust going back to the earliest days of a foal's life. A barn stall, a young foal resting calmly beside an older, steady companion animal, both settled in the dim evening light. Next, retirement sanctuaries, and why older horses there often get some of the most settled rest of their lives. Retirement sanctuaries, where older horses live out their remaining years free of work or performance demands, often turn out to be settings with some of the calmest resting behavior around. Without training schedules or unfamiliar environments to contend with, many older horses there gradually increase their lying down rest, sometimes surprising caretakers who'd assumed that behavior had faded permanently with age. That suggests some of the reduced deep sleep seen in older horses elsewhere may come partly from stress or unfamiliarity rather than age alone. A calm, secure, well-suited environment seems capable of bringing back deeper rest even in fairly senior animals. Caretakers at these sanctuaries often notice particular horses forming close resting companionships, bonds that sometimes last for years, resting side by side night after night. A peaceful pasture at a retirement sanctuary, older horses scattered across the grass, two lying fully down close together near the center, at ease after years finally free of demanding schedules. Next, old folklore connecting horses, moonlight, and sleep across different cultures. Across various cultures throughout history, horses resting under moonlight found their way into folklore more than once. Some old European traditions held that a horse found sweating or unusually restless by morning had been secretly ridden through the night by mischievous spirits, a colorful explanation probably rooted in genuine confusion over more ordinary causes of restlessness. Other traditions took a gentler view, linking a calm, resting horse under a full moon with good fortune or protection, especially among herding communities who depended on their horses and paid close attention to their behavior. These stories are folklore, not science, but they show how closely horse behavior, sleep included, has been watched throughout human history. Long before anyone studied brain activity or used movement sensors, people were already noticing and wondering about these same resting patterns. A faded old painted scene, a horse resting beneath a full moon while a small herding camp settles nearby, firelight flickering in the darkness. Next, one more pause before gathering tonight's remaining threads. Settling into stillness once more. The paddock rests under a sky now showing the faintest early suggestion of dawn, though true daylight is still a ways off. The herd stays in its familiar loose arrangement, some standing, one or two lying fully down. A light dew has settled across the grass, catching what little light remains in small, faint glimmers. Nothing stirs much. The scene keeps its own steady pace. Only a little more ground left to gather before this section reaches its close. For now the paddock rests on, and the story pauses again before continuing. We've covered a lot of ground in this section: a horse's night vision, comparisons with giraffes and zebras, the link between digestion and rest, the gentler resting patterns often found among retired horses free of demanding schedules. Bit by bit, the picture has kept growing fuller. The paddock stays as calm as ever, the herd settled across the grass, weight evenly balanced among those standing, breathing slow among those resting fully down. Near the fence line, that same watchfulness continues, unchanged from where we began. There's still more of this story ahead, a few threads not yet gathered. For now the night keeps its own unhurried pace, the paddock resting under a sky that's barely shifted since this section started. One more physical detail worth getting into: alongside the locking mechanism in the joints, horses rely on a network of strong ligaments and tendons running down each leg, sometimes grouped together as part of what's called the stay apparatus. They work almost like passive cables, holding everything in place with barely any active muscle effort. That's what makes the arrangement so efficient. A human trying to stand still for hours would eventually tire out. A dozing horse can stay upright for long stretches without meaningfully draining its energy, because so much of the structural work is handled passively by ligament and tendon rather than active muscle. It's an elegant piece of natural engineering, refined over an enormous span of time, letting an animal rest comfortably while still standing fully upright. Moonlight on the smooth curve of a horse's foreleg, perfectly still, weight settled evenly, giving no sign of the structural work happening underneath. Hoof health connects to all this standing rest too, in ways that aren't obvious at first. Horses spend a huge portion of their day, and their sleep, on their feet, so hoof condition matters a lot more for them than it would for an animal that lies down more often. Discomfort or minor lameness in a hoof can affect how willingly a horse shifts its weight during rest, sometimes leading to more restless standing sleep as it keeps adjusting to find a comfortable stance. In worse cases, hoof pain can discourage a horse from lying down at all, since getting back up puts extra pressure through already sensitive feet. That's part of why regular hoof care and trimming matters beyond simple movement. It touches something as basic as how well a horse manages to rest each night. A stable aisle in early evening, a farrier finishing up routine hoof care, the horse standing patiently, unbothered. Herd size seems to affect resting behavior in interesting ways. Smaller groups, sometimes just 2 or 3 horses, tend to show more variation in how well they manage that nighttime watch rotation, simply because there are fewer individuals to share the job. Larger herds distribute watch duty more comfortably across more animals, often giving each horse a bit more chance at deeper, uninterrupted rest, since the vigilance gets spread thinner. That doesn't mean smaller groups rest badly. Larger herds may just have a slight structural edge. A solitary horse kept entirely alone tends to show the most disrupted resting patterns of any of these scenarios. A wide, open pasture holding a fairly large herd, loosely scattered, several resting fully down near the center while others stand at the edges. Certain breeds show subtle differences in resting habits too, shaped by history and temperament bred over generations. Breeds developed for calm, steady work. Certain draft breeds, for instance, often settle into lying down sleep more readily than breeds historically selected for alertness or speed. Breeds with a history tied to more anxious, flight-prone temperaments sometimes lean the other way, staying more standing dominant even in secure, familiar environments, a bit of inherited wariness from breeding focused on quickness and reactivity. None of this is absolute. Individual temperament still matters more than breed in the end, but the general pattern is worth noting. A mixed pasture with several breeds side by side, a sturdy draft horse lying fully relaxed near the fence, a leaner, more alert breed nearby still standing, ears turning now and then. A pause here. The paddock rests under a sky still comfortably dark, no real hint of morning yet. The herd stays in its familiar arrangement, most standing, 1 or 2 lying fully down. A faint sound drifts through, maybe some small creature moving in the grass, and fades again almost immediately. The herd barely responds, ears shift slightly, then settle back. A little more ground left before this section wraps up. Companionship with other species is worth a quick mention too, since it can noticeably shape resting behavior. Goats have a long, informal history of being paired with horses, sometimes specifically to calm anxious individuals, a steady presence that can encourage more relaxed, consistent rest in a nervous companion. Some working farms report horses forming bonds with barn cats or other resident animals, with the smaller companion resting nearby during the horse's quieter moments. It seems to offer comfort on both sides, even across pretty different species. These pairings aren't universal or necessary for healthy rest, but they show how flexible a horse's sense of security can be, sometimes stretching well beyond its own species. A barn corner, a small goat curled near a resting horse's front legs, both at ease, sharing the same patch of straw. Rescue and rehabilitation settings offer another angle worth touching on. Horses arriving at rescue facilities, often with a history of neglect, frequently show disrupted resting patterns in their first weeks, unusually standing alert even in objectively safe, well-managed environments. Caretakers often describe gradual, steady improvement, sometimes taking weeks or months before a rescued horse finally starts lying down comfortably and consistently again. Watching that shift happen is one of the clearest markers of how well a horse is settling into its new circumstances. It's a small but meaningful thing for anyone working with rescued horses. Something as ordinary as a horse finally choosing to lie down can mark real progress in its recovery. A rescue facility paddock at dusk, a horse that arrived only weeks earlier now finally lying fully down for the first time, legs loosely folded, breathing slow, a caretaker watching from a respectful distance. Weaning, the gradual separation of a foal from its mother, brings its own temporary disruption to resting patterns. In the days right after weaning, foals often show more restless, standing dominant behavior, unsettled by the sudden absence of their mother. Most adjust within a fairly short period, especially when weaning happens gradually and the foal stays within a familiar herd surrounded by other trusted companions. Abrupt weaning, especially paired with a change in location or herd, tends to stretch out that disrupted period longer. Experienced breeders manage weaning carefully with this in mind, trying to minimize unnecessary disruption to a foal's routine, rest included, during an already significant transition. A pasture with a small group of recently weaned foals, huddled a bit closer together than usual, settling into a rhythm alongside a few calm older companions. Another brief pause. The paddock rests under a sky that's just barely started to soften at the edges, true morning still a fair way off. The herd stays in its familiar arrangement, most standing, a couple resting fully down. A light breeze passes through, stirring the grass just enough to notice, then fades. Nothing here reacts with any concern. A little more ground left before this section closes. We've covered a lot in this section: the mechanics of the stay apparatus, hoof health, herd size and breed differences, the slow rebuilding of trust in rescued horses, the temporary disruption weaning brings. Bit by bit, the picture has kept growing fuller. The paddock stays as calm as it's been all night, the herd settled across the grass, weight evenly balanced among those standing, breathing slow among those resting down. Near the fence line, that same watchfulness continues, unchanged from where this story began. There's still more ground ahead, a few threads not yet gathered. For now the night keeps its own pace, the paddock resting under a sky that's barely shifted since this section started. Donkeys and mules, close relatives of the horse, share most of these standing rest habits, with a few differences from their own separate history. Donkeys, adapted originally to drier, harsher terrain, tend to be even more comfortable with standing rest than horses, sometimes needing even less deep, lying down sleep to feel recovered. Mules, a cross between horse and donkey, land somewhere in between, generally similar resting patterns to horses, with occasionally a bit more of that donkey-influenced tolerance for extended standing rest. Handlers who work with all three tend to pick up on these small differences fairly quickly after enough quiet nights of just watching. It's a good reminder that even among closely related animals, small differences in original habitat and history leave lasting marks on something as basic as how an animal rests. A mixed paddock with a horse, a donkey, and a mule standing together, each slightly different in posture, but all following the same unhurried rhythm. Extreme heat brings its own challenge, especially in drier regions where daytime temperatures climb. Horses there often shift most of their rest, standing and lying down both, toward the cooler overnight hours, staying active and alert mainly in the brief windows of early morning and late evening when temperatures are more manageable. Shade becomes valuable during these stretches. Horses cluster under whatever natural or artificial shelter is available during the hottest part of the day, sometimes resting standing up even in daylight just to escape direct sun, saving real deep rest for after the heat breaks in the evening. Breeds developed in hotter, drier regions tend to handle these conditions better, another layer of adaptation built over generations spent adjusting to a particular climate. A sun-baked paddock at midday, horses gathered under a wide tree, standing in the shade, waiting for cooler hours before settling into deeper rest. Modern welfare standards increasingly take a horse's need for rest seriously, reflecting decades of research on the topic. Guidelines in many regions now recommend adequate paddock space, secure fencing, and appropriate herd companionship specifically with healthy resting behavior in mind, rather than focusing only on feeding and basic shelter the way older standards did. Some larger equestrian facilities have started folding simple sleep monitoring into regular welfare checks, using basic movement tracking to flag horses getting unusually little lying down rest, treating it as worth investigating, the same way unusual eating patterns would be. It reflects a broader shift in how horse care is approached, rest treated as a real pillar of well-being alongside nutrition, exercise, and veterinary care, not an afterthought. A modern stable yard, spacious paddocks in the background, a small discreet monitoring device near a horse's shoulder, unnoticed by the calm animal wearing it. Performance and competition horses, especially in demanding disciplines, sometimes get even closer attention to their resting habits than typical pleasure or pasture horses. Trainers running high-level competition schedules have increasingly recognized that inadequate rest can quietly affect focus, coordination, and performance, even in a horse that otherwise looks physically fit. Some competition yards now build rest periods deliberately into travel and training schedules, making sure horses get chances for both standing dozes and proper lying down sleep even during busy competition seasons. It reflects a growing understanding that consistent rest actively contributes to performance, not just background upkeep. It's a fairly modern shift, treating sleep with the seriousness historically reserved for nutrition and conditioning, gradually becoming standard in top-level equestrian programs. A competition stable the evening before a major event, one horse already lying comfortably in a deeply bedded stall, given extra quiet time before an important day. A pause here. The paddock rests under a sky just starting to hint at dawn along its far edge, true daylight still a ways off. The herd stays in its familiar loose arrangement, most standing, one or two resting fully down. A faint chill settles across the field, the kind that often shows up just before night starts giving way to morning. The herd barely reacts, comfortable and unbothered. A little more ground left before this exploration starts wrapping up. Looking back across everything covered tonight, a fairly clear picture has come together. Standing sleep, that strange little habit most people walk past without noticing, turns out to be a well-refined system built from old survival instincts, supported by clever passive anatomy, backed by herd cooperation, and shaped further by climate, history, age, and individual temperament. None of it happened by accident. The locked legs, the rotating ears, the careful watch rotations, the brief but essential deeper rest, all of it works together as one system, refined across an enormous stretch of evolutionary time. It's easy to look at a horse standing quietly in a field and assume nothing much is happening. Quite a lot is, all of it running quietly under that calm surface. A wide field under a slowly lightening sky, a whole herd resting easily. Human sleep researchers have occasionally drawn loose comparisons between horse sleep and unusual human sleep patterns, particularly historical accounts of segmented or biphasic sleep, where people rested in shorter, separated stretches rather than one continuous block through the night. The comparison isn't exact, given how differently horse and human bodies are built, but it's a reminder that continuous overnight sleep isn't the only way a mammal can successfully rest. That kind of comparative thinking has influenced broader sleep research too, pushing scientists to treat rest as flexible and shaped heavily by a species' particular history and environment, rather than assuming one universal pattern applies everywhere. It's a small but genuinely interesting overlap between horse behavior and wider scientific curiosity. A horse resting standing in a moonlit field, and somewhere far off, an old farmhouse window glowing faintly, its occupant resting through the night on their own separate rhythm. Before closing out, one last moment to sit with the whole picture. Somewhere in the paddock, a horse shifts its weight gently from one leg to another, barely stirring. Nearby, another rests fully down, breathing slow and even, given over to that brief, essential deeper sleep we spent so much of tonight on. Everything covered tonight, the old instincts, the passive anatomy, the herd cooperation, the small details shaped by age, breed, climate, and history, comes together in this one ordinary scene. A horse resting peacefully, the way it has for thousands of years, carrying a system built long before anyone was around to study it. There's something comforting in that. Some of the more interesting things in nature turn out to be hiding in habits ordinary enough that most people never give them a second look. And so we arrive at the end of this story. We started in a quiet paddock, watching a horse stand still under a darkening sky, and spent all this time since uncovering how much thought sits behind that ordinary habit. The locked legs, the old instincts, the herd's watch rotations, the brief but essential deeper rest, all of it working together, night after night, mostly unnoticed. The paddock stays calm as we leave it, the herd settled across the grass, one horse still standing watch near the fence line, same as it's been the whole time. A small, ordinary scene carrying a much older story than it first appears to. Thank you for spending this time here with us tonight. If this story helped you settle in and drift off, consider liking the video, subscribing for more slow stories like this one, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Sleep well, and good night.